Welcome to the American Security Council Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. The mission of the American Security Council is to educate and engage American citizens on national security matters, economic security matters, and the need for moral leadership in the United States of America. Please enjoy the podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, Joy Vacherbeck, Senior Research Analyst here at American Security Council Foundation. Today, we welcome back Dr. Scott Tilley, Senior Fellow for the American Security Council Foundation. And we're going to talk about what is ahead for 2021, both problems and possibilities that this pandemic has made us aware of. Dr. Scott Tilley is a professor emeritus at Florida Institute of Technology. He's also president of the Center for Technology and Society and president of Big Data Florida. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you back again.
Well, thank you for having me.
You wrote an article, and we posted it back in January, called Looking Ahead to 2021. If you could start with your cybersecurity and expand on that. I know that has the pandemic has shown us some holes.
Indeed. So the column in January, which was called, as you said, Looking Ahead to 2021, was trying to surface some of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected us in maybe ways we weren't expecting. And it does seem like there was only one news story last year, which was COVID-19. But in fact, there were other things going on, and they continue to go on. But you have to dig for them sometimes. And I picked three topics which we can discuss. One is cybersecurity, one is supply chain, and one is biomedical engineering. Now, if we talk about the very first one, which is near and dear to the Foundation's mission, of course, cybersecurity, I think we'll probably postpone the whole discussion about solar wind because that's a complicated discussion just on itself. So maybe we push that one off for a bit.
And might I say your new article on it itself came out today, so we will be posting that.
Okay, very good. But there were unfortunately, there are many other instances of cybersecurity attacks on our infrastructure, many breaches, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to defend against these sort of attacks. Let's take a simple example that's close to home. Maybe a month or so ago, there was a small town outside Tampa, like 15,000 people or so. And like many small towns, they operate their own water treatment facility. And the treatment facility was hacked. And it was hacked using a pretty simple attack, which is to use an insecurity in software they use for doing remote login. So basically, if there's a manager or an administrator sitting at home or on the road, they want to log into the system to make some changes, they can do so. And it turned out literally some kid hacked it, and they found out that the attack was taking place in real time because all of a sudden, the mouse on the operator's screen was moving around without him doing anything. Now, there's two things to take away from that. One is it shows you how simple the hack was, because a good hack would never have something as obvious as moving the screens around remotely to indicate, oh, someone's in your system. But it was only by chance that the operator noticed this was happening, and they were able to do a manual, basically not quite a shutdown, but a block of what this hacker was trying to do. And that was change the chemical mix of the water treatment to dump in huge amounts of lye, L-Y-E, because lye is used to treat, bad things in the water. And in very small doses, it's what helps make our water drinkable. In large doses, it could have severely made people quite sick, if not worse. So that's something that is happening now all the time. They're not always, made public because it never looks good for any organization talking about the fact that they've been hacked.
No. In fact, I read that article and we did post it on our site. That is scary that they can just hack into our infrastructure systems like water and electric grids.
Indeed. So the nation itself has known for a long time that one of the most difficult things to defend against would be one of these infrastructure attacks. I'm actually reminded, have you ever seen the Die Hard movies?
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure if it was number 3 or 4, but basically the main character was his partner, if you want, was a young kid, a hacker. And he was helping, I remember the character's name is John McClane. He was helping McClane try and bring down a hacker who was doing something called a fire sale. And a fire sale in hacker terms is when all things go down all at once. So everything's for sale. Water, transportation, electricity, just all gone. And of course, this is fiction. This is a movie, but it's something that cybersecurity professionals worry about a lot. The old saying in cybersecurity is the attackers only have to be successful once. The defenders have to be successful all the time. It's not an even match. And now that you have so many tools that are available that people can literally buy, they don't need to understand how they work. They're used on places like this water treatment facility. Now, this says nothing about when you have nation-state attacks. But one example that was in the news related to COVID-19 is Pfizer. Pfizer's facilities have been attacked repeatedly trying to get the secrets of how to make their Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Because it's very, very expensive to develop new vaccines, but it's much, much cheaper, of course, to just steal the IP. The usual suspects are probably the people behind it. It's interesting. I just read last night that North Korea has said they've had no cases of COVID-19 in the entire country. Did you know that?
No, I didn't hear that one. I find it hard to believe, but...
must be doing something right in the water over there. But they're one of the likely suspects of doing this and the other usual places.
That's what I heard, yes, about the hacking of vaccine companies.
Yeah. Now, it's not just the theft of intellectual property, because what if or when, the secret sauce, if you want, gets out from any of these, especially the mRNA vaccines like Pfizer, Moderna, they're so leading edge that it would give someone a big step up, but it would also be a potential bioweapon, because all they have to do is modify the vaccines, and it would really erode further public trust in vaccines if you started having tainted vaccines being delivered in different parts of the world. It would be terrible. And we're using, the vaccine for COVID-19 as an example of only one of many, many pharmaceuticals, of which are, millions and millions of dollars and decades typically go into the research and development with all the clinical trials. So you can see that these facilities would be, from a commercial point of view, a big target. But arguably right now, vaccines are a national security issue, because we actually have, vaccine nationalism right now. I just read today that the U.S. said they will not be exporting vaccines until all Americans are vaccinated, because I think Canada was wanting to get extra copies, but they said
I think, Mexico as well. I heard the same thing this morning.
Yeah, so it is literally a national security issue. Other organizations that get hacked all the time and they end up paying are things like schools, hospitals, healthcare clinics, in part because all those organizations they're heavily networked. They're often running older, outdated versions of the software, and they have very stretched IT departments. Not every hospital is the Mayo Clinic, right? They're not all at the leading edge of everything. So they get attacked often, and malware attacks are one of the more common ones. Basically, they lock the system and force you, it's called ransomware, to pay a ransom. Otherwise, they'll either never unlock the facility or they'll wipe the data, or both. And in many cases, these hospitals end up paying, weird cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or something, because they feel like they have no choice. You can't run a modern hospital on, paper and pencil anymore.
Yeah, and that's a scary thing with the hospitals. But I wouldn't have suspected the school system as much. Why do you think that?
Well, they're even farther down the chain in terms of having robust IT infrastructure. Why would people be doing that? Well, they may want to get private records and make them public for ransomware. We know what your employment history is like. We're going to put it out there if you don't pay. This is more individualized rather than institutional. But these are low-hanging fruit, so they're easy. Yeah. They're easy to do. Yeah.
And I'm sure they weren't prepared for it either, so it makes them more of a target.
Yeah. Now they also have less money to pay, but so they just start doing more and more people. Unfortunately, this is like the cyber version of kidnapping. Right? People get kidnapped in different parts of the world, almost as if it was a quote business. And not all these people are rich, but when they do it sort of at scale, it's worthy enough to do. It's terrible. Now, for us, one thing that's going to probably make it worse going forward is something called the Internet of Things, or IoT. The IoT is basically devices that are connected to a network. I counted in my home, when I was doing a talk on this last year, I'm sure it's gone up, how many devices in my own home are connected to the internet. And I think I stopped when it was about 52.
Goodness.
I mean, I don't know how many Alexas I got in the home, all kinds, televisions, phones, routers. Even my sprinkler system is on the internet, and my pool control, everything.
And a lot of people do that, yes.
Right. I mean, the convenience is great. But those devices, which are connected to the internet, are, in fact, I mean, they're held back behind a firewall. But the firewall, that's basically the router you might get from Spectrum, for example. Unless you change the default password, then anyone can get into almost anyone's router. And if you have ever sat at home and say, I wonder what Wi-Fi networks are available in my home, and you've got a list of like 20 of all your neighbors.
Yes, I've seen that.
And it's pretty trivial to break into them. And then you can poke around everywhere. One of the most written about devices are doorbells. They're easy to hack. People have been threatened and had kind of like ransomware say, we're watching you, inside cameras and doorbells. So one of the reasons why these devices are so easily hackable is that they're made by hardware companies, typically overseas companies, that have very little experience in creating secure software. Moreover, they don't have much incentive to spend the money and the energy to become cyber sophisticated, because they're just selling basically throwaway consumer devices. So they don't need to do so. They never get updated. And once a hack is known and gets published on the dark web, it just sits there being exploitable until you basically replace the device. We have millions of these devices now. So
and speaking to that, the hardware coming from overseas and foreign countries, that leads into your other point of the supply chain issue. And can that make us vulnerable with these with this hardware that's in our cybersecurity devices?
Indeed. I'll just drop a little cookie for our next talk, which is the SolarWinds hack that we'll talk about next time was in fact a supply chain hack. Incredibly sophisticated and very hard to defend against. But physical supply chains, I believe the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the national security implications of having very weak global supply chains. I mean, a supply chain, just to describe it, is basically a series of producers of products, sometimes in a long chain. A company makes one piece of hardware, it gets shipped to another company, they add on to it, gets shipped to another company, gets added on to it, eventually even makes it to the U.S. shores and gets assembled here. So it says assembled in America, designed in California, built in Taiwan or something. So you've got all kinds of components, and each of those companies have components being supplied to them. So we have supply chains in the automotive industry, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, basically everything that we need to keep our modern economy running. And if you're able to disrupt those supply chains, then you have things that happened at the beginning of the pandemic, like the lack of personal protective equipment, or PPE. Because ironically, most of the PPE we were using comes from China. It was cases where I know Canada was sending jumbo jets to China at the beginning of the pandemic with PPE, and then they found out, oops, yeah, we need it, and it was too late. And then we had all kinds of counterfeit PPE being sent here, which, of course, if you think you're wearing an N95 mask, that's going to filter out most of the virus, but it doesn't, because it was made in who knows where. Very bad. We have other issues all related to the COVID-19 supply chain as well. Testing kits and the lack of the reagents that go into them. I mean, there's a reason why the very rapid tests in many parts of the world have not been rolled out much, and that is the inability to get all the ingredients necessary to put these kits together fast. We've also got supply chain issues related to the ingredients that go into vaccines. So we end up having some countries that no longer are able to create vaccines, and they are therefore at the whim of the suppliers of wherever they might be. I brought up Canada before. They no longer are able to create their own vaccine. So when they get the vaccines they're using, they mostly come from Belgium. And when things don't work well, then they just sort of don't have vaccine doses to give out. So that the public health implications of that and the economic implications of that are terrible. Closer to home, we've got a supply chain issue right now, which hit our advanced economy very hard, and that is we have a semiconductor supply chain problem right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you may have read that companies like GM and Ford are closing down or limiting their assembly lines because they can't get the semiconductors that go in the cars. And the majority of these semiconductors are built in Taiwan or in Shenzhen in China. Now, we do have export restrictions on some high-end hardware and computer chips. I believe at some point we're going to have to move this offshoring of these critical components that are part of a supply chain in the national interest back onshore. And most supply chains they exist because they're cheap. Otherwise, why would we go through the problem of having things built all over the world and assembled in this way? But they are not built to be very resilient. And that's what the COVID-19 pandemic has shown. One or two little knocks on any of those major manufacturers or the suppliers, and everything kind of falls apart.
I think a lot of people would agree with you on that too, bringing a lot of it back on our shore. But I think too, Americans are very innovative. Do you think we will see more innovation here? I
do. I think we can use the technology that we develop to support this reshoring of work. A great example is Tesla. Right? No one thought anyone could be able to build cars in California anymore. With so much regulatory compliance requirements, high wages, and so on. They said, no one's going to build cars in California. And there's Elon Musk churning out Teslas at a very innovative factory. There is a downside to it, however. He makes extensive use of automation. So the number of people actually working in those factories is far smaller than like a Ford or a GM plant in, Dearborn, Michigan. But I think that the use of automation and technology will be what allows us to reshore many of these essential parts of our economy. I think just a few days ago, I read that the Biden administration was about to have some sort of task force looking at different areas like pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and how to reshore the supply chains for these important products.
Oh, good. I did not read into that yet, but that's interesting.
Yeah. It will be good for our national security. It will be good for our economy. It'll help our exports because once you do this, we can re-export things to other parts rather than just importing so much from the Far East for semiconductors, for example. There is absolutely no reason why we couldn't be doing it other than right now or recently cost. But if we use technology judiciously, I believe the cost factor actually can work in our favor.
Yes, I appreciate that. I had read some articles during the pandemic that other companies that weren't even related to maybe the PPP or PPE, were retooling their manufacturing and making them here so we would have supplies.
Yes, I've seen, for example, a lot of the part suppliers for the automotive industry who have very, very complex supply chains. Parts due to NAFTA or whatever the current version of NAFTA is called,
right?
The North American Free Trade Agreement. When cars are built here, parts flow back and forth literally multiple times. Canada, America, Mexico, back over the border before the car gets all built. The pandemic, of course, put a stop to a lot of that other than essential travel, which continues today. So I was reading a number of articles about automotive part suppliers who switched to building, plexiglass shielding and other PPE and those big masks and so on, and even N95 masks, depending on what product they were building before. In fact, I even read about a number of small distilleries that switched from making vodka to making, hand sanitizer.
Yeah, I read that too. Yes. That's why I say we are innovative, that we can do things this way. So, but the semiconductor situation has certainly brought us to see what the supply chain issue can be, and loss of jobs now, having to shut down the plants.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, some of these things are kind of fly under the general public's radar, and semiconductors would be one of them. I bet if you ask the average person, do you know why GM, is slowing down production of their cars? they would probably say COVID or, social distancing or something. They would never think, oh, they're missing the semiconductors that go in the car. The first question would be, what semiconductors? In fact, there are hundreds of them in cars.
Yes.
I
did hear they were hoping to, Taiwan was hoping to open a plant here in the U.S., but I mean, that's going to be a while, so.
Yeah, I think through Foxconn. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a project a number of years ago with BMW, and I was actually flabbergasted to find out the amount of software and hardware that are in, their high-end 7 Series cars. Mm. And a number of years ago, the cost of the software in the car for BMW passed the cost of the hardware. So they actually spend more on software development than they do on the hardware, which is amazing because most people think of a BMW. Their motto is the ultimate driving machine. It's a machine. But in fact, it's actually a mobile computer.
That would probably make it hackable as well.
Unfortunately, it is. Yeah, so you can find videos online of people hacking all kinds of, especially electric cars, the EVs, because they are far more advanced, if you like. And that comes back to our previous discussion about cybersecurity and IoT and smart cities. These things are all interconnected, which is why you need someone at some large government agency to have oversight into all these parts, because there's lots of them. And it's really hard when you have a complex system, like an electric vehicle running in a smart road, a smart city, where someone is just sort of nodding off. They're not even driving anymore, right? Which is possible now. And all of a sudden there's an exploit made available to some part of the car, like the brakes or the transmission. And bad things happen.
Yeah, that's so scary. That one, I know we'll discuss that more in your SolarWinds hack article next time, but let's move on to some really possibilities out there with the biomedical engineering. Can you expand on that a little?
Yeah, so biomedical engineering, as the name suggests, is actually a very hot topic right now in many universities. For example, it's a very hot topic at Florida Tech and other Florida-based universities, because it's basically about using technology into the healthcare field. But I don't mean when your doctor comes into your appointment and he's using it like an iPad or something. I mean, these are devices that'll help you live better. So right now we have a sort of three things that are changing very quickly. One is artificial intelligence. So AI, which is basically just programs, software algorithms. They're already being used, and we now have drugs that are in early clinical trials that were designed completely by algorithms, not by scientists, not by a doctor. Wow. Because the drugs are now go through simulation. What if you change this molecule structure? What if you change the dosing? And from that, they just let it run. It runs millions and millions of simulations until the end result pops out saying, this particular chemical formula is effective against this particular virus or ailment, whatever it might be. And they end up having drugs eventually that are nothing like something a person would ever come up with. So that is something that is actually coming very quickly. And personally, I'm looking forward to it.
That will give Americans more freedom as they age to be able to stay at home, if I understand your article correctly.
Right. Yeah.
In particular, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, think about again, it's a relationship here to COVID-19 again. And that is the disaster that's taken place in multiple countries in long-term care homes. Mm-hmm. The people who are in there are most vulnerable, and they've been the most hardest hit from the coronavirus. And multiple levels of government just got it wrong. We had New York State sending infected people from the hospital back to long-term care homes, misreporting or underreporting by up to 50% is what I heard, the number of deaths that occurred to COVID-19, which has terrible knock-on effects for data scientists doing modeling of what's going to happen with the coronavirus, because now they have faulty data. However, if we think that long-term care homes are problems, then the alternative is what's sometimes called aging in place. And I can tell you, I personally would prefer this, and that is stay in your own home absolutely as long as possible. Don't get put in one of these sort of factory facilities where, the care is not so great at best, even though the people who work there are doing absolutely the best they can. They're usually understaffed, underpaid. It's just problematic. And then when you have something like a pandemic piled on top of it, it exposes the weaknesses of long-term care homes.
I think a lot of Americans would agree with you, and they'd want to stay home as long as possible, especially, like you said, the pandemic has exposed the problems.
Indeed. So the issue, however, is if someone's going to stay at home, they either have to have a full-time caregiver, a husband or wife or child or something, or they pay for someone, which becomes problematic for those who aren't wealthy, or you have someone come in all the time, or we again try to be innovative and make use of technology. The one place that's actually leading this in terms of geriatric support through robotics and AI is Japan. They have a very different view of robots than we do. When I think robots, I think the Terminator. Someone's going to come kill us. In Japan, they tend to be viewed as aids primarily for the elderly, because Japan's demographics are leading in the sense that they have one of the highest proportions of elderly people of any advanced country in the world.
Yes, I have read that, yes.
Yeah. So they simply don't have the ability to have people take care of all the old people. And they also severely limit immigration into the country. It's very different than here. So when you're in Japan, almost everyone is Japanese. That's pretty much it. So what can they do? Well, then they start using automated aids, robots. We would call them like Zoom calls, except that it's like, imagine you've got a combination of a Roomba, but it's tall, like maybe like a little child, and Alexa inside it, and it's got a camera and a screen, and it moves around their house, and it can talk to the doctor, or it can talk to the patient, and the patient can then talk to, their family members as well on a daily basis. But this thing is it's also able to do basic things like maybe help them up eventually, get them out of bed. Those things aren't here yet, but a combination of those robotic aids plus physical aids, like this is work that's done by DARPA, the Defense Department, where you enhance soldier strength by putting an exoskeleton on. So if someone is disabled or they're in a wheelchair, but they do have movement of their legs, but their legs are very weak. Maybe we can enhance them so they can actually move around a little bit more than they can. The overall goal is to have dignified, respectful aging as long as you can in the environment that you're most comfortable with.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know a gentleman that has, I think it's a heart, correct me if I'm wrong, like a defibrillator that is actually will sense if he's going to have a heart attack and start the process.
Yes. So that's actually ironically back to the Internet of Things. Many of these biomedical devices are, of course, internet or internet enabled. They're on the network so that your healthcare provider can monitor things. I'm wearing an Apple Watch right now, and it has slip and fall warnings and other things you can enable, and you can actually share that information with your doctor. So that's incredibly valuable. I mean, the fact that you can do heart analysis and stuff on my wrist without having to go to the hospital or do these tests is just amazing.
And you spoke particularly, one I'm very interested in to hear about is the closed loop insulin delivery mechanism in your paper.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been diabetic for 30 years now, type 1, which means I need insulin to live. Okay. And actually until about 10 years ago, I did shots, but I was up to about 6 shots a day. And I did a quick sort of back of the envelope calculation, and I found out that since I became diabetic until when I switched to the pump, I'd given myself about 30,000 injections.
Wow.
30,000. You can visualize that pile of needles sitting on your floor. It's a big pile. And people would ask me, does it hurt? I was like, yes, every time. I mean, why would it stop hurting? It hurts every time. So eventually I switched to a pump, which I'm wearing right now. So the pump is something that's attached to your skin through kind of a tap, and you only have to basically put a new hole in yourself every 3 days or so. So definitely beat 6 shots a day.
Yeah, definitely.
But you still need to manually test your blood sugar using a little tester. So I'd have to do that 5 or 6 times a day, which means, the ends of my fingers have got all these little brown dots because over time, it starts getting hard because you're constantly poking it, right? It's basically responding to that trauma.
Yes, I understand. My dad's diabetic. That's why this very much interests me.
Okay. So the recent development in the last couple of years are something called CGM, which stands for Continuous Glucose Monitor. So that's another thing you have to attach to yourself, plunk it into your subcutaneous, typically on your fatty belly. Mm-hmm. And it is constantly testing your blood glucose level. And if you have a smartphone, depending on which CGM you're using, or another device, it sends results. It can give you warnings if your blood sugars are dropping too low or if it's going too high, which is very useful. Of course, many people, for example, who are diabetic have blood sugars that stop either dropping or rising in the middle of the night, and they're asleep. They don't realize it. So these devices are able to warn you when something like this is happening. What we would really like, where this closed loop part comes in, is if the device is measuring your blood glucose level, why can't it also control your pump to either give you more insulin or take away insulin?
Sorry, that's our timer. We're running low, but go ahead, finish that.
What we would really like is for the glucose monitor device to communicate with your insulin pump. That's what's called a closed loop.
Okay.
If it sees your insulin is dropping or going, if your blood glucose is dropping or going too high, it would send an instruction to your pump to either increase or decrease your insulin amount, called the basal rate, which is, it's always dripping in very slowly. Right now, my understanding is the FDA does not allow this sort of closed loop system because it is completely automated. Right? It's going to adjust your insulin without you doing anything. And they are concerned, back to cybersecurity, of either the pump or the sensor being hacked, which is already proven to be possible, terrible but true, or a software problem in one of those two devices that causes the insulin to go up too high or too low. And again, both of those cases would have a detrimental effect on whoever's using it, so like me. So for now, until they can prove both safety and efficacy, they basically have an open loop system where you've got a sensor on one side and a delivery mechanism on the other, and you got the person in the middle, like me, who's got to manage. Okay, the sensor says I need to do this, and then I have to go over and manually do it.
Well, that's a lot better than what we have had in the past. I will say that.
It is, and I can do it. But if I was someone going back to this aging in place, who's got maybe poor eyesight, shaky hands, just cognitive issues, they can't do that. It's not going to be possible. So they're stuck again, sort of waiting for someone to come in to help them. So it's promising, but there's a ways to go.
And you did answer my final question, because it was, can this biomedical mechanisms be hacked? And very much so, apparently. So I hope that they can work those loops out, because this is promising for the future.
Yeah. Unfortunately, anything that's on any network, wired or wireless, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RFC, whatever it might be, as long as you have a connection, you can hack it. It'll always be like that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for talking to us today, Scott. It's a good hearing from you again, and I appreciate you coming on the Protecting Our Freedoms podcast.
No problem. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking about the second little cookie here.
Yes, we will be talking about solar winds
next time.
Yes, sounds wonderful. And you can view Scott's Solar Winds article on our website today. Go to www.ascf.us. You can also find more of Dr. Scott Tilley's work on his websites, both at www.cts.today and www.bigdataflorida.org.
Correct.
All right. And you're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter as well, correct?
Yes, I'm all over the place.
All right.
You'll find me.
Thank you so much again for coming on today. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
You too. And to everyone, you can view our podcast posted on YouTube at American Security Council Foundation. We've also recently been deleted from Facebook, so we would appreciate your help in getting our message out by sharing this podcast with your friends and family. as well as any donations you can give to support our work. So please visit our website. Again, that's www.ascf.us. Until next time, stay safe.